Well, good afternoon, you wonderful humans. Just kind of want to get a feel for the audience. How many of you have ever been to some sort of user group or meetup before? Hands? Okay. Do any of you run any of those groups? Okay, I see a couple of you. All right, so you'll feel me on this. Before I get started, though, do want to take a second to say thanks to all the sponsors. They're why we're able to have an event like this in such an amazing venue and some really damn good food, right? I'm sure you've been to conferences before and the food's like, ugh, and you have to go across the street, but it's been really fantastic here, and so that's in large part to the sponsors. A lot of work goes into putting on conferences, I don't know if you know, so absolutely show some love, say thank you to the organizers, say thank you to the staff members. It's really due to them that we can be here today and have such an amazing event going on. A little bit about me, other than my foodiness, is I am a JavaScript developer. I work remotely out of Kansas City, which is a lot of fun. I run a nonprofit on the side, which I'll tell you a little bit about and how it kind of plays into what I'm going to be talking about today. Also an international speaker, and I'm loving this stage because I'm totally a crazy plant lady. I have plants all over my office, so I'm like at home with this setup. It's absolutely fantastic. So if you didn't know where I'm from, that's where Kansas City is on the map, but what really matters is our most valuable export. You may know Paul Rudd. Yeah, good times. The new Avengers trailer just came out, by the way. I won't judge you if you watch it during my talk. I almost cried. So 5 years ago, I launched a nonprofit called Kansas City Women in Technology because I, as a software developer, looked around the room and was like, where are all my ladies at? And there weren't a lot. So I set out to figure out a way to solve this issue and meet more women that looked like me, because I don't know if you might have looked around the room today, looked around the audience, but kind of an interesting ratio going on there. And so I wanted to meet more women who are software engineers, got really excited about that. And so we had this huge launch party. I think about 300 people showed up. And it was really interesting because I didn't meet a lot of women who looked like me. I didn't meet other women engineers. I met women who wanted to get into software engineering and didn't know how. I met educators who wanted to figure out how to bring code into their classrooms to get people into technology. But not a lot of women like me. And so that's really interesting in the way it shaped the trajectory of our organization and a lot of our leadership strategies around there. Is anybody familiar with Coder Dojo? Coder Dojo, nonprofit. Yeah, I found it out of Ireland. That was created as an after-school club to teach kids how to code. Really amazing model. So we went ahead and we launched a chapter in Kansas City, and that's been running for about 5 years now, and we have a lot of fun, as we say, teaching kids to teach themselves how to code, because that's what really matters in creating the engineers of tomorrow. But we would run into some really interesting things when we'd be promoting this program at nights. We would explain to parents what Coder Dojo is, and the programmer dads would be like, oh, this is amazing, I can't wait to bring my daughter. But oftentimes from parents, especially from mothers, we would get a response that would be something like, oh, I don't think my daughter would like learning how to code, maybe I'll bring my son. And so it was really interesting. We were having this, very adverse reaction from the parents. So what do? We brand it pink, we make it girly, and all of a sudden they think it's fine for girls to show up and code. The code underneath is the exact same. I still have 8-year-old girls, deploying their websites via GitHub pages via the command line, so I don't really care what color it is, but all of a sudden it became more accessible for them to show up. And from there, we had a lot of women who were like, hey, I don't have a daughter, but I really want to come. Can I learn to code at Coding and Cupcakes? And we're like, well, it's kind of definitely geared towards the 8 to 13-year-old crowd. So we launched Coding and Cocktails, which is our 11-month-long curriculum teaching front-end development, particularly focusing on JavaScript front-end frameworks, get a little bit in command line, a little bit into version control, and then a host of other workshops. We run Django Girls, which is another nonprofit actually founded out of Germany, and different things. And I do all this in my spare time as a volunteer outside of my full-time software engineering job. And so that's where a lot of this comes into play today. And why do communities matter so much? Why do I do this work? Why do you all attend these events? Why do you do the work? It's because this is workforce development. It would be really, really great if in our industry we could get everything we absolutely needed to know out of our jobs, but that's just not a reality. And so we constantly are looking for outside sources to connect, to expand our learning, expand our knowledge. Especially with working with a bunch of engineers, we always want the new shiny toys, right? And we can't always implement that on a project, so we'll look outside into user groups and find out what other people are working on and ways to learn about them. Networking. Unless you're a huge introvert like me and you hide in a corner and wait for people to come talk to you, networking is a really good resource for communities, and again, something that gets people out and getting to know each other. Growth opportunities. I don't know if you've ever thought about getting up on a stage like this, but you know it's a really good place to start doing that at meetups and user groups. So you can definitely reach out and work on your own professional growth and learning opportunities. And if you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of physiological and psychological needs, there's this really great thing when you go to a user group where like everybody does what you do and they get you and they understand your nerdy jokes. You have this sense of belonging and sense of self-actualization, where you understand where you exist in this ecosphere of your talent and where you stack up against others, and can realize, hey, I really do kind of know my shit, right? Like we can kick imposter syndrome to the curb. So, all of that to say, community organizers are unsung heroes. This talk is for you, and on that note, buy your favorite community organizer or staff member in a shirt a shot of Palinka tonight. They will love you for it. So why 10 Commandments? This kind of came out of a joke where a bunch of organizers were talking in a Slack community, and somebody had trouble with a venue. And I made a joke along the lines of, well, thou shalt always confirm thy venue thrice. I was raised Catholic, and of course, we learned all about the 10 Commandments and how Moses brought them down. So crash course, if you do not know what the 10 Commandments are, according to the Bible, they are rules that God handed Moses down. The most important 3 being on their own stone, and then the other 7 on. Not that they aren't all important, but like the first 3 are the big ones. So that's what we'll focus on first. So the number 1 commandment in community organizing is thou shalt practice self-care. You can't get burnt out, because this does no good for anyone. If I'm going to be as effective as I want to be as a leader, I need to be on top of my game all the time. And that means I cannot be staying up late every night, cramming, trying to do too many things, because I will stretch myself out, get burnt out, and end up crying myself to sleep at night, not being good for anybody on my team. So we have to avoid burnout. One of the ways we can do that is by taking on small tasks and improvements. When you're running a group, it's easy to get overwhelmed by all the input and feedback you see, or something might not go right and you're trying to figure out a better way to implement that. But again, if you're doing this in your spare time and managing a volunteer team, you're working with very limited resources when you compare that to doing it as a full-time job. So you need to be very aware and figure out ways to break down tasks very granularly. Coder Dojo, we had an issue. We'll start the kiddos in Scratch. Scratch is a drag and drop UI program developed by MIT. And so they'll be doing their projects and create little cute presentations and games, but we started getting complaints from parents. And the parents would be like, well, my kid keeps making the Scratch project over and over again. Like, when are they going to do real coding? And we're like, okay, well, that is kind of real coding. It's problem solving. But we started to think of small ways we could go and take on and figure out how to improve this problem. And one of the things we came up with was an intrinsic motivation tool. And we rolled it out very gradually, but essentially we told the kids, okay, we're going to give you mastery badges, which are cool little buttons that they could apply for and get to like show off on their t-shirts, but if they completed a certain level of skills. And so we started with Scratch, started with a very small rubric of everything they had to accomplish. They did that, okay, great. Then we built a HTML one and a JavaScript one. So we took a big problem of how to get these kids excited and motivated and pushing into new technologies, and found a really small way to break it down and make it happen. Give yourself office hours. So I'm always curious when I talk about this kind of stuff overseas, because I know America is notorious for our 40, 50, 60-hour work weeks, maybe 2 weeks of vacation if you're lucky. And so we have this very like work and grind culture. And so one of the really good ways to kind of get around that is you give yourself office hours just like you would in your job. You're working 9 to 5, right? With me, for instance, I get so many damn emails. I fucking hate emails. They just drive me up the wall. And so I always have my first couple hours of my day, like 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., and that's my email answering time. That's my office hours that is blocked out on my calendar, where that is my time to do that, so nobody can schedule me for anything. I also have openings for coffee meetings and that kind of thing. So if you can start to really own and manage your calendar, it can help you mitigate your time and manage your day better. I also have evenings blocked off, so if my team for my nonprofit wants to schedule me for a one-on-one or something like that, they can do it in that office hours. And it helps me manage my time to make sure I can do everything efficiently. On that note, you do need to guard your time carefully. It's really easy to get into this pattern where if you're running a group and you're doing it for free, you should be able to do everything and solve all the problems and solve cancer, right? And that's just not feasible. And so you need to be really careful about your time and not overcommitting and doing too much, because when you overcommit, you get burnt out and then you don't do anything well. We want to avoid that. Your time is your biggest asset. This is the biggest thing that you can donate to your community, so guard that asset as much as you can. No is a complete sentence. So another little rule that I have made up over time to help you guard your time is a person's incompetence in email is directly proportional to the likelihood that they will massively waste your time. I hate it, but it is proven true time and time again. I kind of tend to take Spock's approach, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And so in all my decision making and all my responses, I think, okay, how can I be the most effective as a community leader and as an organizer? And sometimes that means not answering somebody's like 4-paragraph email of just utter nonsense when I have much better, more productive things that I could be doing with my time. My team has come to believe that this rule is absolutely true too. They will back me up on that. A key thing here as well is defining your personal scope and not going outside it. Again, with that issue we get into in the nonprofit world, in the running meetup worlds, is people expect because you're doing something for free that you can do everything, and we cannot do that. So we need to be really good at setting boundaries and maintaining those boundaries and telling people, you know, no, I am one person, this is one organization, we cannot expand and grow as much as we'd like to. Find a task tracking system that works for you. I am obsessed with Trello. My entire life exists in Trello. I do my trip planning. If I have stuff going on with my nonprofit, it absolutely gets dropped in my Trello board. Even my meal planning that I do for my meal prep goes in Trello. That's what works for me. Find a task tracking system that works for you. I know when my anxiety gets really, really bad, I will completely scrap any application on the computer, and there's something oddly cathartic about putting a pen to a piece of paper and writing down your to-do list for the week. If you ever find yourself getting really, really overwhelmed, I would recommend trying it. It's interesting how that works. And own your calendar. Has anybody heard of Calendly before? Couple hands. All right. This is the best thing in the world. It is as close as you can get to a personal secretary. It is a system that actually links up to your email account and your inbox, and you can set like scheduling blocks. And people can schedule you for coffee meetings, and so you don't have that back and forth email trying to sync up times and figure out when and where works for everybody. They can just schedule on your calendar, and that's all you have to ever do. This has absolutely saved my life. I use it for my leadership team. They can schedule me for one-on-ones. That way, all my leaders do the same thing, where their team members can schedule their one-on-ones via Calendly. It's really a great time saver for us. Who likes getting criticism? Anyone? Okay, it's hard, it's rough. But anytime you're doing anything in the community, anytime you're organizing some sort of event for a group of people, you're gonna get criticized. You're gonna get criticized a lot. And it doesn't make sense, right? Because you're doing this amazing for good thing out of your free time. Like, you don't have to do this, so what the fuck are they doing criticizing you? But it will happen. And so you need to be aware of it, because if you're not going to listen to criticism, you are never gonna grow as a human, you're never gonna grow as a leader, and you're never gonna grow as a community organizer. So this criticism, especially when it's of the organization, it's very hard to not take that very personally and against yourself. But you need to get in the mindset of understanding that this is gonna help you learn and grow. And do you wanna be mediocre, or do you wanna be amazing? And taking feedback is one of the ways you can get to being amazing. I really like this quote a lot. It's helped me kind of navigate some situations before, and it's, take criticism seriously, but not personally. If there's truth or merit in the criticism, try to learn from it. Otherwise, let it roll right off you. I remember a couple years ago, there was a woman on my team, was definitely not performing well. And we had been kind of on the fence about asking her to step down, and, you know, gave her another chance. And it was very clear that not only was she not doing a good job, but she realized, everybody else realized she wasn't doing a good job. And so we were having one of our monthly meetings, and we were all in a room, and in the middle of this meeting that she did not show up to and did not email ahead of time, sent an email in the middle of the meeting, 4 paragraphs long, to everybody on the leadership team, saying that she was resigning, excuse me, and then 4 paragraphs of how I'm the shittiest human being she has ever met. And just had like paragraphs and paragraphs of criticism. And it was very clear to see that she was definitely trying to point the finger and make it look like she wasn't the person who had the problem. But me as a leader reflecting on this criticism, especially when it came in the middle of the meeting and it was like all the air got sucked out of the room while everybody reads it, is I looked through this and I was able to pick through and say, okay, like, I understand where she's projecting here and trying to, you know, point fingers or blame me for something that she didn't do. But there was a point to this. This didn't come out of nowhere. There was something she started with to get upset with me about and then project from there. What can I learn from this insane criticism to make sure that I handle situations like this better in the future? So a couple things I did out of that email is, I started doing the one-on-ones with my team, and every time I send an email, I tell my team members, I want to hear your complaints, I want to hear your concerns, I want to hear your feedback. My calendar is always open. Book me for anything. I don't care if you want to bitch about the organization, me, life, if you just want to grab a cocktail and talk. But I really did everything I could to kind of open those lines of communication with my team to avoid that kind of situation happening ever again. We really buckled down on expectations. I felt as a leader that I could have been clearer in what we expected her role to be, and that was my failure as a leader, and so that was something I learned from that situation. Criticism sucks, though. It's hard, it's crushing. I've cried myself to sleep at night more than once. And what's really helpful is building a network, because it can be lonely as a leader, it can be lonely at the top. You feel like you have to kind of put on this facade for your team, and you can't show vulnerability. And you can't let it all out. And there are times that you just need to kind of talk through problems, and you don't necessarily want to talk through problems with team members because you don't want it to be gossip or people fighting against each other or things like that. So it can be really important to find a community, build your network, find people to talk through problems with, find a mentor if you can. And make sure to pay that forward. Like, once you've got your legs underneath you, find ways to mentor others in your community. One of the best things that we can do as leaders and as community organizers is mentor and bring up other people, because that's how we create sustainable communities, right? Is we build more people up, and then more people get involved, and it's really, really amazing the things that you can do with a group of people. On that note, learning to delegate, especially for a hardcore type A control freak, is terrifying, and it's hard. But it is also one of the most rewarding things you will ever learn how to do. The first year we ever ran a Django Girls workshop, I think we had about 60 to 75 women on that weekend that we taught how to code, and I did most of it myself. And the event ran okay. Like, it was definitely to my expectations, like, things went well. But I definitely didn't want to do it year after year, and so I brought together a team, kind of brought them into the loop, coached them a little bit to get them up and running. And the year they ran the event, and every year since, attendance has grown by 50%. They have done so much more amazing things. Like 2 years ago, we actually brought in dogs, like rescue dogs, that people could play with during their coding breaks. We took yoga breaks, because one of the complaints we got the year before was that people were like, oh, I was coding for 10 hours. I wish you would have made me get up. Even though I didn't want to take breaks, I wish you would have forced me to take breaks. So it was really amazing to have this team be able to bring together all these amazing things and really execute and build a more amazing program that I could ever do alone. So everything we can do to learn to delegate and learn to trust other people and build teams as leaders will really help us accomplish our visions. Thou shalt become an expert communicator. Every problem I have seen is a communication breakdown, right? One of the most common problems we have with my nonprofit is somebody will come onto the team and they're really excited and they can't wait to get started, and they jump into the Trello board and they start doing all these tasks. Well, then somebody else who had been slowly working on some of those tasks gets upset because this person is clearly stepping on their toes and clearly trying to take over and clearly trying to take their job, and why are they bothering to show up anyway? Simple communication oversight. And so as leaders, it's really important for us to really hone and finely tune our communication, because that's going to be the source of our success and our failures. Rule number 1. Never ever assume people are as tuned into your organization as you are. People have their own lives. They have their own shit going on. They've got their own responsibilities. They've got to pick the kids up after work. They have a million things going on. So never assume that they're in your head and understand everything you know that's going on about your organization. Make it easy for them. Choose your communication format based on your recipients. Is everybody pretty Slack happy in here? Slack users? Okay, yeah. So I feel like a lot of technologists really rely on this idea of Slack or some sort of asynchronous chat communication tool. And it's almost like a crutch for us, because email is the worst. But it's really important to understand that you need to choose your communication format based on your recipient. We've added a lot of people to our team that aren't Slack users. They don't come from technology backgrounds. That's not what they're used to. And so we make sure to approach them in a way that makes sense for them. So if we talk about when to Slack, appropriate times, convos where everyone is online and available. You can see their little green dot. Hopefully they're responsive. If you've got like a quick question a day kind of thing, like somebody wants to ping me, find out some information really quick, that's fine. Or maybe if we're just randomly bullshitting and like submitting funny links, because that's what happens on Slack. Relaying important org-wide information should not happen in Slack. It's so easy to lose everything in those threads, and if you're not on at the right time, it might quickly go by you and it won't be on your radar, and then you don't know what the rest of the team is talking about. Never give feedback in Slack. This is a one-way ticket to disaster city. I've seen so many fights happen. I have accidentally offended people just being too terse in Slack. No malintentions, but it is one of the worst tools for communicating feedback. Feedback should be done in person. And finally, group brainstorming and decision-making, if not everybody is there, can be a really exclusionary activity. And again, Slack is such a crutch. It's so easy to get in there and just start typing in brainstorming, but when people are left out of that conversation, it can really break apart your team and erode communication. When you're emailing or communicating with people, make it easy for them. It's going to take more effort on us as leaders, right? But we want to be a support system. We don't want to be a roadblock. And so anything I can do to empower my team to perform their jobs better is a win for me. So when I'm formatting emails forever, we talked about creating memory earlier in the day, right, with giving more details. So one of the formats I use that I've encouraged my team to use is this very simple date formatting, where we call it specifically the day of the week, the date, the time, and the time zone. Especially when I'm traveling all over the world speaking at conferences, it's really helpful for my team to know when I need a response by or when they want a response from me based on time zones. So the more details we can give people, the more clear we can communicate, the better the results are going to be. This is an example of an email I send to my team. We have about 50 people on my nonprofit team who are all completely volunteers, right? And so they're all focusing on their different roles and running their different programs, but I'm up here at this 20,000-foot view. And so one of the things that I do every month is I check in with the team. I'm like, hey, big picture organization-wise, like, here's what we have going on for the calendar. Here are the big bullet points. Here are people we're interviewing for the organization. Here are people who've come on board. Here are sponsorship updates. And again, this is a lot of work and time and energy on my part, but it keeps my team together and keeps them coherent. And it's one of the lessons I've learned the hard way in this kind of leadership track, is understanding not everybody has my point of view from seeing that big overhead picture, and so it's helpful to keep everybody on the same page by doing that. Finally, how many times have you sent an email and just not gotten a response and it's infuriated you because you really need to get something done? Happened a couple times? Yeah. Rule is, if you want a response, you need to end with a specific call to action by a certain date. And this is something I've learned, again, with like a volunteer team where we're all kind of operating in our different hours whenever we have time, is when I need something done, I say, hey, I need X, Y, and Z from you very specifically and by this date. Even if it's a yes, confirm yes or no. And I include that date, and it's really amazing how many responses I get to make sure I'm getting the information I need. All of this sounds like a lot of work, and it is going to take effort and time, but your teams are going to function so much better, so much more coherently, so much more competently, and just the culture will be a lot better when you really hone in and are effective with your communication skills. Thou shalt manage expectations. And so we're commandment 3 now, so this is the last big one, but I want you guys to memorize this, okay? People are not psychic. People are not psychic. People are not psychic. This is the most important thing you can remember as a community organizer. You run into this issue where people will have certain expectations about your event. And when it does not meet their expectations, they get upset and complain. So the better you can set up people for your events, the better the outcome will be and the less off-the-wall complaints you get. We run coding workshops, right? And coding is this like mysterious, like enigmatic thing that people just have no context or no concept for, and so they can't manage their own expectations. So if you've ever done any bit of developing, there's a lot of environment setup that goes on. You have to download an IDE, a place to write your code. You have to install these different packages depending on what kind of tools or frameworks you're using, and that can take an hour or two. And so when we have attendees that come to one of our programs and they come to a coding program, right? They expect to be coding the entire time. They have no expectation of what it's like to get their computer set up and going. And so one of the things that we've learned is to really manage their expectations and say, hey, we're going to spend this much time dealing with installs. We will give you resources ahead of time so you can work on your own, and then we'll come together as a group and we'll do the coding. So the more you can set people up to understand what to expect, the less complaints that you will get that don't really relate, and you can get feedback that's more effective and better for you to learn from. we talked about this a little bit already, but the fact that we're doing this as volunteers, right? The number of times I've gotten asked the question, oh, this isn't your full-time job, kind of blows my mind. And the funny thing happens is that, again, volunteer organizations, people assume just aren't restricted to traditional business restraints because we're doing this for free, right? That means we can do everything, and it is not true. I get criticized and chewed out all the time by parents. They'll come up to me and they'll be like, well, you need to come run a coding club at my kid's school, and I'm like, hello. One single human, I cannot solve all the problems in the universe. But you need to be okay with standing up for yourself and explaining to people, well, we are a volunteer-run organization. We're taking time away from our lives and our families on this Saturday morning to teach your kids how to code. This is the reality. This is what we are able to do. Here's how to do it on your own if you would like to. So this is a conversation you need to get comfortable having. And on the final note of managing expectations, crazy's gonna cray. I am obsessed with this really trashy reality TV show in America called The Bachelor. And this is Corinne, probably one of my favorite villains of all time, who is perfect for this. Because there are some people that no matter how well you manage expectations and no matter how well run your event is, they will find a reason to complain and cause chaos. I will always remember this time that we were at a networking event. My nonprofit kind of does like casual networking events. We do different like speaking presentations and panels, but this was just like a casual networking event at a bar, and I was sitting down at a table and there were two women sitting across from me. Like it's probably 5:55, the event's gonna kick off at 6. And I see through this door this man come in, and he's got this like crazy like hair out to here, his his clothes are skewed, and he like locks eyes with me and beelines for me, and I'm like, oh fuck, this cannot be good. So he walks up and he just starts reaming me for the fact that I'm running a nonprofit and his daughter's in computer science at a college an hour away, and she loves computers, but her friends make fun of her and she doesn't have a mentor, and what the fuck is my organization gonna do about that, and how could I possibly like do anything because she doesn't have a mentor? And he is just chewing me out, and the poor women sitting across from me just like look terrified. And so I'm trying to de-escalate this guy. He's just going off, and so finally he winds down, and I'm like, well, you know what, sir? I completely empathize with your daughter. Like, I understood. That's very much how I grew up. I'm really, really busy right now, but here's my personal email address that you can give her so she can contact me. And he goes, well, I can't do that. She wouldn't listen to me anyway. Okay, dude, like, yeah. So he didn't want any tangible outcome, right? He wasn't there to make things better. He literally just wanted to scream at me. And so it's one of the dark sides of community organizing, but if you're mentally prepared for that to happen, you can spot the crazy earlier on and learn how to mitigate and manage it. Moving on. Thou shalt not neglect thy volunteers. A big part of running community groups and running conferences is having an amazing group of volunteers who are dedicating their time and their energy to make events happen well. So the biggest part is do not make your volunteers herd cats. And what does this mean? This means having tasks and duties and things for them to do the minute they walk in the door. There's nothing worse than showing up to volunteer for an event and just standing idly trying to like figure out what to do, like to help get things or get involved or understand what you can do to make an impact at the event. Like, why the fuck are you there if you're just gonna stand there awkwardly? So if you as an organizer can have tasks and duties ready for what you want your volunteers to work on, they're gonna be a lot happier. They're there for a reason, right? You know you need bodies, so tell them where to go. Big things that we worry about, there's always check-in chaos. So as we're getting people checked into our programs, we know we're gonna need volunteers there. If we're having food delivered to an event, like if we might have pizza come in later in the night, we know we're gonna have to have volunteers to set out the pizza. I will forever be traumatized. Somebody told me a story about a Django Girls event where they walk into the venue on the weekend and an hour into the program discovered that the janitorial staff hadn't been in and there was no toilet paper in the women's bathroom for a women's coding event. And so they had some people that were able to like run out and grab toilet paper. So having volunteers around is fantastic. When we're making things easy for our volunteers, we want to do a couple things like making parking and arrival instructions clear, especially if you have one of those buildings with multiple entrances and it's like, 0 degrees Celsius out. You don't want people wandering around. So make sure they know how to get in the building. Have an emergency contact number available. Women, I do not recommend putting your phone number out there. You can use Google phone numbers to kind of route to your phone. That way you can protect your private information. But again, having clear instructions, duties, and responsibilities for your volunteers listed out. One of the women that were in our Django Girls workshop actually prints out this amazing itinerary that kind of has like a line-by-line item of who's doing what and what's gonna happen when and what to work on. It's really fantastic. And as much as possible, keep your volunteers out of the line of fire of criticism. because crazy is going to cry. There are a lot of times when we're dealing with parents, and parents can get a little grumpy in the mornings when they're bringing their kids in, and it's 8 o'clock on a Saturday. And sometimes they will get a little unpleasant with my volunteers at check-in, and I have to tell the parents, hey, we're volunteers, we're taking time away from your family, you need to be polite and respectful. And we actually have that in our code of conduct, so we can kind of call people on it and be like, oh no, you need to be nice here. Plan your events ahead of time and give your volunteers plenty of notice. There's nothing more insulting or just irritating to get that last-minute email 24 hours in advance. Oh, can you help with this? Oh, we'd really appreciate your help. And it's like, no, I have a life. I've got shit to do. Like, I love to give back to my community, but you need to respect my schedule. And do not forget to feed your volunteers. I see this happen so often at conferences and events where I'll see like the poor teenagers like sitting at the staff table, and they're just like longingly looking at the lunch line, and I offer to get them food because organizers are so caught up in the million things they have going on and making sure there's enough food for the attendees and everything like that they forget to feed their poor volunteers. And if you're anything like me, like I get hangry and I get mean if I don't get fed, so feed your volunteers. And find ways to thank your volunteers. Obviously, they're here for intrinsic good, right? They want to help, they care about your cause. That's why they're here for it. But that doesn't mean that we can't find ways to reward them. And one of the best ways to do this is to solicit their feedback and act on it. You as a leader mean nothing if you're asking your team for feedback but then doing nothing about it. There's nothing more frustrating than having suggestions or making it feel like you're heard but then seeing no actual results. So when you solicit their feedback, make sure you act on this. Offer leadership opportunities. A lot of times that you're at a job and in the way promotions and growth happens, there aren't a lot of organic opportunities. And so getting involved in a volunteer or nonprofit or meetup group organization can be a really great leadership opportunity experience. Provide nice volunteer shirts. Like I hate when you get that scratchy crap and it doesn't fit right or they don't have women's sizes. Don't do it, it's just not fun. Plan appreciation parties and dinners. This is one of the things that we always do after we have like a really long weekend code shop where we know the mentors and the volunteers are just going to need time to decompress. So we'll have a nice dinner, we'll bring in a bartender, we'll play like Cards Against Humanity. Just kind of plan special little things like this that show your volunteers, hey, we care. You can also promote their efforts on social media. So if they've, pushed out a new GitHub repo or they've done something cool, use your brand to help support them and help grow them. Show them that you appreciate them as a person outside of what they offer to you and your organization. And another thing you can do is nominate them for awards. Especially in the women in tech space, women are notorious for not promoting ourselves or not wanting to brag. And so one of the things that we're really active about as an organization is bragging on behalf of our members. So we submit them for awards. Anytime they've got something big going on, like we make sure to get some press around that. And so that's a really nice thing that you can do for your volunteers. Again, this probably sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like a lot of time and energy, but these are the things that are going to keep your volunteers coming back, and that's going to make your community more vibrant and more sustainable, and that's what we care about. Thou shalt plan as far in advance as calendarly possible. Yes, I know I'm making up words, but it matters. It's actually a lot easier if you kind of set a 6-month timeline and then fill in the gaps as you go instead of like doing that last-minute scramble 2 weeks before to try and find a speaker. If you can get into kind of a pattern and routine like this, it'll really be a lot easier to book speakers. Consistency is key here. If you can give people something they can regularly schedule around, it's going to be easier for everyone. If you're running a meetup, like let's say the first Tuesday of every month, that can be really, really helpful for people's calendars. This is going to be way easier to book speakers, volunteers, and venues in advance. We've had a lot more success with our events if we've been able to stay in one single venue versus hopping around the city. And venues are very grateful to work for us if we can schedule them far in advance instead of coming with last-minute requests. And finally, on the note of planning, if you have diversity goals, make an effort sooner rather than later. I cannot tell you how many times in my city I've gotten an email where somebody's like begging me to be on a panel. Like there's this one time I got this frantic email, oh, we just realized we don't have any women on our global economics panel. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking to me for? I flunked econ and I run a local user group. I have nothing to contribute to your panel. I'm not going to be your token woman. And so if you really do care about diversity, which I hope you do, especially after that brilliant talk we had yesterday morning, make those efforts sooner rather than later. On the note of working with venues, thou shalt always confirm thy venue thrice. And I made this rule after we got locked out because somebody forgot about us. So there we are, sitting outside of a building, like knocking on the door, trying to get in because we've got all these kids that want to learn how to code, and they just forgot about us. Here's your other big rule. CYA, cover your ass. The thing is, vendors and venues have a lot more to focus on than just you and your event. The world does not revolve around you. And so you need to have this like kind of cover your ass mentality to make sure that your events run according to your expectations. You need to follow up. It is your responsibility as a leader, as an organizer, to ensure that your events run as advertised. And sometimes that means making sure that your possible points of failure working with other venues are compensated for. And finally, be a courteous venue guest. That means giving them shout outs on social media, but especially cleaning up after yourself, asking if you need to take out the garbage, and don't overstay your welcome. I know kind of the tendency after user groups and meetups is to kind of stay around and chat, but a lot of times if you're at a building and that staff person is wanting to get home to their families and they have to wait and they're just kind of watching their clock while you guys are talking, it's not always very nice. So be courteous and don't overstay your welcome. Thou shalt arrive at least 1 hour before starting time. Setup will always take longer than you expect. Your team or speakers will be late, and your attendees will show up early. The first year we ran the Django Girls workshop, we had it scheduled for 7 p.m. at night, and so our team got off their day jobs around 5 o'clock whenever the venue to set up. Well, a lot of our attendees decided to come after work at 5 o'clock too, and so we had about 50 women sitting in like this little like hallway because we didn't expect them to show up early, and we're running around like chickens with our heads cut off trying to figure out how to get the event set up while these people are waiting in the hallway. So your attendees will show up early, it will happen. Thou shalt test the Wi-Fi and bring any supplies needed. Nothing will destroy a technical event faster than no Wi-Fi or shitty Wi-Fi, which actually might be more infuriating than no Wi-Fi. On that note, you need to make sure that you have the contact information for the person who can reset the router. Because sometimes you'll be at a place and they've got some sysadmin on a high horse and he's got the router locked up and nobody can touch it because that's his little kingdom. So you need to make sure that you can have access to whoever the person is who can solve any of your Wi-Fi issues if they happen at the time. Bring all the dongles. Technically speaking, it is a speaker's responsibility to make sure they have their appropriate adapters, but humans are fallible, like we don't always do the right thing. So kind of come prepared, have the dongles, have the HDMI cord. We actually carry around like a portable speaker just in case, because it's your event ultimately that's on the line. And thou shalt have a designated chaos lead. You may be familiar with Murphy's Law. All right, so Murphy's Law here is what can go wrong will go wrong. And this is like the biggest truth for event planning is because no matter how well you follow my 10 commandments, no matter how perfectly you plan, there will be shit that goes down. There will be no toilet paper in the bathroom that you didn't think to check. So just be aware that Murphy's Law can happen. The problem is if you're running an event where everybody has a very dedicated role, if they need to pop up to solve some sort of crisis or deal with chaos, then that's taking time away from their responsibilities. So one of the things that we've learned that's been really beneficial is having a chaos lead. And this is that person to deal with any random emergency that could come up. Our bartender is late. Okay, well, who's going to run to Costco to get some cheap wine to hold us over? That kind of thing. So if you go into this mindset of understanding that no matter how perfect and amazing you are, shit will still go wrong, you can more easily adapt and plan with it. That's what Agile is all about anyway, right? Constant vigilance. And our final commandment that could actually be a whole talk in and of itself is thou shalt focus on process improvement whenever possible. This very much ties in with our feedback, but understanding that we can always improve and we can always do better. Retrospectives are your best friend. They're not just for software engineering. So after every single event we do, we run a retrospective. And so we'll bring all our mentors and our volunteers together and we'll ask, what went well? What didn't go well? And what do we need to do better next time? And we get really amazing feedback. You can try and send out surveys to your attendees. Like, getting survey data is like pulling teeth. It is mind-blowing. And so there's a lot of times that you just won't get any valid content. But if you're doing a retrospective where you're asking your volunteers to give feedback or your mentors to give feedback, they're going to give you pieces of information, things they overheard, comments they heard, things they noticed that are going to be really, really valuable to helping you run better events in the future. More things that you can optimize. If you get a lot of repeat emails, again, I hate emails, so anything I can do to avoid answering emails is a win. If you get a lot of repeat emails, put those on the FAQ page. If people still aren't reading the FAQ page, make the font bigger until you stop getting those emails. Identify your pain points and work on those first. One of the big problems we always have across all of our events is check-in and making sure we get everybody checked in on the computers. Some of our venues, we have waiver forms to sign, that kind of thing. And so that's one of the pain points we really learn to optimize with our check-in process. So kind of look at your organization, look at what your team is the most pained by, what stresses them out the most, what are they spending their most time doing that's silly and can be automated so they can use their brains for the hard parts. If you're not a big social media person, automating posts to social media whenever possible is really good. We try and streamline a lot of our stuff so we don't even have to think about worrying about the marketing or anything like that, and so our team can focus on really good campaigns. And then the biggest thing you can do is begin gathering data as soon as you can. It's a surprising amount of work, especially because surveys are hard to get people to fill out and thinking about questions that are being effective and things like that. But the earlier you can start gathering data about your organizations, your events, the more quickly you can begin showing the efficacy of your programs, but also making decisions based on data. So this is a lot of work, but it's absolutely worth its weight in gold. So in summary, our 10 commandments: thou shalt practice self-care, commandment number 1. Thou shalt become an expert communicator, manage expectations, not neglect thy volunteers, feed your volunteers, plan as far in advance as possible, confirm the venue, arrive at least 1 hour before starting time, test the Wi-Fi, have a designated chaos lead, and finally focus on process improvement wherever possible. If you want to take a photo of this is where the slides are available online, and I believe it is time for questions. I'm trying to open this water bottle.
Sorry, thank you very much. What did you say?
What?
I thought you said something.
It's time for questions.
Yeah, it is. It is time for questions. And we have a bunch of them already on Slido. Thank you very much for the presentation. So what would you advise how to start a community after you have a goal, purpose? So what should be the first step?
I would say your first step would be to clearly define your mission. Like, what is the goal of your group? Is it to teach about a certain technology? Is it to unite a group of people? Because it'll be really easy to stay on track and make sure you're delivering what you're expected to deliver.
Okay. Do you also consider Slack the wrong platform for a simple poll as a form of decision making?
Unless you have a please answer this by time, and I laugh because literally I was just watching Slack the other day, and one of my teams, they were trying to coordinate a meeting, and 2 people hadn't responded yet to the Slack poll, and it had been 3 days, and they're like, hey, we need to schedule this meeting. So it depends on your team dynamic. If you can make sure that everybody is going to respond to the poll, then yes, but if it's going to cause more problems than it's worth, evaluate accordingly.
Yeah, so it's partly personalized or something. Everyone can find out what's the best tool for themselves. Okay, can we have a big round for the Stretch volunteers? Yeah, it's a very good idea. Thank you very much. And indeed, there are a lot of people behind this conference. We will mention them when we close the conference, but thank you very much for the questions, because yes, without the volunteers, it would be really difficult to manage even events like this one. So it's a really good point. But there are some people who are not satisfied yet with your presentation, and they want to squeeze out some more information. It says you compiled a very nice list of rules. If you could squeeze in one more, what would be the 11th?
That's hard. I don't know about a rule, but if I could emphasize anything, it would be learning to build a team effectively, which could be an entire screw all the commandments. That's a whole section in and of itself. But I'm really proud of the work that our team has done. And we've put a lot of time and energy into having an actual interview process. And yes, we are a volunteer organization, but we actually have job roles that we list for things. And so we operate it like a company. And so that mentality, I think, if I could figure out a smaller way to summarize that.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and I think this is the big, this is the red line, whether you can make these people to feel, all their responsibilities for these things, or they just treat it like, okay, it's a gig. If I have time for that, I can do that. Speaking of gigs and full-time jobs, would you do this as a full-time job?
I get asked this all the time, and fuck no, I like writing code.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you very much. Let me hand over this cup for you. As you know,
Aw.
Does it ring a bell? It actually does. So I don't know if you guys can see, but it's pretty cute. Thank you very much again for coming.
Thanks.
Let me check.